The Seattle Kraken just hosted a press conference with owner Sam Holloway, new president Ron Francis, and new GM Jason Botterill talking about the changes to the organization and maybe kind of, sort of, but also not really explaining why they got rid of Dan Bylsma and what the actual vision is of this organization moving forward. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Seattle hockey fans, welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, and it's a game day for the Firebirds as well as the Mavericks. We'll talk about that later. But in case you are meeting me or hearing me for the first time, I have been with the Seattle Kraken since before they were announced as the Seattle Kraken as a writer. I got to be one of the writers on deck as the Kraken officially announced their logo and all of their branding, etc. I got to write about the Colored Hockey League, Willie O'Ree, and so many other things. The Women's Hockey League that preceded the PWHL. And now you can find my hockey musings, not only on Locked On Kraken, but also as an analyst for CBS Sports, where they bring me on for CBS Sports HQ as an NHL analyst, as well as a women's basketball analyst. So we're here today. I'm here today, pretty quickly following today's press conference. Now, the press conference was initially scheduled to be an update with the general manager, who was at the time Ron Francis. Now, if you've been keeping up with Locked On Kraken and just the overall Seattle Kraken news cycle, then you likely know that the Seattle Kraken have decided to fire their second ever head coach, Dan Bylsma, after one season. We also know that it has been officially reported that Ron Francis will move into the role of president of hockey operations, and Jason Botterill will move into the role of executive vice president of hockey operations, as well as the new general manager. So we heard from Botterill, we heard from Ron Francis, we heard from Sam Holloway, and also Todd Leiweke was at the dais, on the panel, whatever you want to say. And as far as takeaways, here are my takeaways. First is, I still don't completely understand why Dan Bylsma was let go, or at least not a real example was given. And I'm going to give you a direct quote as to why. Point number two, I still think this organization is not quite on the same page when it comes to what the timeline is. We heard from Sam Holloway, we heard from Leiweke, and we also heard from Jason Botterill. And I think they're saying different things with regard to when and how the organization is going to get to competitive. The third thing I will say is, this is, at least if we listen to Jason speak, is going to be an organization that really leans into their youth. And I think they're also an organization that is not completely convinced that the young players that they have are going to be the star players of the future. So let's break this all down. First, I don't think everyone's quite on the same page. We heard from Sam, and what I heard Sam Holloway saying is that, this is an organization that really wants to be in the playoffs. And that's not surprising. We've heard it before from Holloway. We've heard it before from other people, Leiweke, in the organization. But this is really what Sam Holloway wants. One of the last things that she said, I'm looking over my notes, is that we want a sustained playoff team, and we want it ASAP, as soon as possible. What she also mentioned, though, is that the metrics to get there, they are a little, I'm going to paraphrase or interpret what I think I heard, is that the metrics on how to get there are fluid. They move, they change. Okay. I mean, it's not that that's wrong. It's true. It's a little bit subjective. What one year is going to make you a playoff team versus the next, because the league is changing, personnel changes, a lot of things change. So I will give you that. And what? We need a roadmap. We need a roadmap. Okay, why else do I think that this team is not on the same page? You know, um, Lywicki was asked or took the question. There was a question, I think it was Glenn from Davy Jones' locker room, that asked, is it fair to criticize the front office? Hello, I know one host of a Seattle Kraken based podcast has been doing that for years. And this is what Lywicki said. Sure, it's fair. And then I have an ellipses because he said other things. But we have a track record of being committed, is what Lywicki said. When you are about to hire your third head coach in less than 5 hockey seasons, I'm having a little bit of trouble underlining that word committed. I'm having a little trouble there. You know, committed to whom? Committed to what? They're committed to Ron Francis. I've been saying this, and I probably am coming off to some people as like a Ronnie Francis hater. That's not the case. I just find it interesting that as all of this is bottoming out at the team level, the coaching staff and the players, Ron Francis is getting promoted. That just to me seems a little bit counterintuitive, because he's the guy that hired the last 2 coaches. Both of them were his guy, right? But there was something that Sam said, and it was with respect to there was another question asked about how this team might be come off to other players as a team full of vitriol. There's a lot going on. And what Sam effectively said is that, and I don't have the video yet, but I will drop the video. I love dropping video for you so you can hear it for yourself, because I don't want you to rely only on my interpretation. You should be able to come to your own conclusions. The live stream is available, and I will have it on future shows, but I want to get this show up because I got playoff hockey plans, baby. All right. Anyway, but what she's saying is that, you need a coach that is going to take direction. You need a coach that is going to give direction. You need a coach that is going to be able to have two-way conversations with the front office. And, sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you get it wrong. And didn't I say that yesterday? I know I said it yesterday, and I know I've said it before. The insistence on letting go of Dave Haxtell, but especially Dan Bylsma, signals to me that this is a front office. This is an ownership group that's trying to immediately make corrections on previous errors, mistakes from the past that they feel are creeping up on the organization. Now, you can say, is it fair or not to Dan Bylsma? I do think that's a worthy conversation. Also, there are a lot of metrics that do not align to give Bylsma the benefit of the doubt. There were 2 that were mentioned explicitly. One was the 0-12 on back-to-backs. And I found it interesting that Ron Francis said that they did the analytics. At first, they thought it was a conditioning issue. Again, your host right here, Erica L. Ayala of Locked On Kraken, has been talking about the conditioning of this team since our first coach. And that perhaps conditioning, missing practices, things that Ron mentioned today, things that I mention all the time. You know how I feel. Are we talking about practice? Everydayers and OGers, you know my practice rants. According to Ron Francis and the data that they have, the Seattle Kraken actually skate faster on the second day of a back-to-back. They looked at, is it a goalie situation? The back-to-backs are almost equally split between Grubauer and Decord for this season, and Coco got in there as well. So I found that interesting. Another thing that was explicitly mentioned, which is another thing that your friendly host of Locked On Kraken has been saying for years, is that there were defensive lapses. Given the caliber, given the skill set of the defensemen that the Kraken have at their in their arsenal, what we were hearing from Botterill as well as from Ron Francis, especially Ron Francis, is that he felt that the structure, the defensive structure of the team failed the team at times more so than in years past. That's what he said. I don't know that I completely agree. You know, I've been harping on defense for this team for literally years, for 4 years, 4 complete seasons. I've seen defensive breakdowns, not just from the defensemen. So I'm very curious to break down some metrics and to hear what the Kraken are looking at, because again, defense has been a little bit of an issue. But I will say the one thing that blew my mind that I need to look into more is when Jason Botterill was asked, I believe it was by our good man, Mike Benton. This part I want to read to you because it blew my mind, and I'm still not sure. It's not even 30 minutes later that we're not even 30 minutes removed from the press conference that I'm recording for y'all. So I'm still very much processing this, and I do take words and language and context very seriously. But this is what Mike Benton had to say. I think you mentioned earlier about the players and the exit meetings with all of this process going on. And I think the back-to-back record was a part of it. What else was an important part of their message that kind of led us here to this day, and the coaching absence also? And what we heard from Jason Botterill, again, the question I just read was from Mike Benton. The quote after that question, again, asking, I'm summarizing, coming off of the players' meetings and the exit meetings, thinking about that the back-to-back seemed to be part of wanting to make a change. What else led us here to this day? Jason Botterill said, just to be blunt, nothing really. Just to be blunt, nothing really. Ooh, okay. What? Am I the only one scratching her head? Am I the only one that's trying to understand, sir, what do you mean by that? Are you meaning to say there was no cause that you're willing to talk about? And it goes back again to something that Samantha Holloway said that caught my attention, saying that, you want to have people that do this, 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 and this. She listed all of these things. And then she said, and sometimes you get it wrong. And that got me thinking, of course, about the time in the middle of the season where 32 Thoughts reported that people aren't pleased with Bylsma, that Ron Francis never wanted Bylsma. And then, of course, I reported that that Ron Francis joined the broadcast to talk about Dan Bylsma. That's where the "he's my guy" comes from. So I'm trying to connect some dots here for myself, for you as an audience. Something is, and I've talked about this before throughout the season. It became clear to me at the time that 32 Thoughts was reporting this, and then the organization wanted to poo-poo those reports. There's no beef, there's no tension, we're all aligned. I told you then, even making that statement on the Kraken Hockey Network, to me, signaled that not everyone was aligned. And my takeaway from today's press conference is that things are not quite aligned. Why do I say that? Because this is what we're hearing from Botterill. So again, Leiweke and Holloway want us to be contenders as soon as possible. What we're hearing, though, from our new GM, who was an assistant GM under Ron Francis, under Leiweke, under Holloway, what we're hearing is that this is going to be a focus on young players. This is going to be a team that wants to elevate young people. We also did hear that from Lywicki, that the core group wants to be here. So that goes back to something that I talked about and something I heard on the Predators podcast. If you ask the guys in the locker room, do they want to be here? Do they still believe in this? Apparently the answer is yes. So that's good. But what we're also hearing is Jason Botterill say, and I think he's absolutely right, that this is not a team that is just one player away. He says, we're not one player away. He wants to push up young players. He wants to leave the roster open for competition for young players. He wants to develop young talent. He wants to see more of a net front presence defensively and offensively. He wants the numbers to reflect better what the defensemen can do. And he wants to allow young players to develop. That doesn't sound like a team that is primed for the playoffs next season. But again, that's what we're hearing from Lywicki, and that's what we're hearing from Holloway. We want to be a sustained playoff team ASAP. What we also heard from Lywicki and Holloway kind of co-signed is that the easiest thing to do, right? The path of least resistance would have been to keep the coach. I think Lywicki said something like, nobody, except for people in our comments on Locked On Kraken, nobody's asking us to fire the coach, but we did that because we're committed to progress. So again, was Dan Bylsma the worst? I don't think anyone's saying that. He wasn't the best. This was not the best season in Kraken history. I guess that belongs to season 2 and Dave Haxtell. But I still don't get a clear sense of why Dan Bylsma couldn't be the guy to step in as they're making these changes at the top. The only thing that makes sense to me is that some of that reporting from 32 Thoughts was correct, and or they're separating the Ron Francis era in the immediate front office. Now, I don't know if that's because Jason Botterill worked underneath Ron Francis, but ultimately in this breakup, if you think of it in those terms, the Seattle Kraken picked Ron Francis. Not because Dan Bylsma necessarily is a bad guy or did things poorly, but if I'm getting the sense that maybe if there were some tiffs, if there were some disagreements, they want to clear the path and make it evidently clear that Ron Francis is the guy for this organization. And that came up a lot, his track record. He's a Hall of Famer. He, all the reasons that we should listen and adhere to his word. And I like Ron Francis. I also like Dan Bylsma, though. And again, firing him, saying some of the things that were said today, to me signals not that he was bad and everything was on him, but that maybe you shouldn't have hired him in the first place. That's kind of the vibe that I got, is like we're correcting a mistake. Someone I think at one point said we can do better. And it's not because, at least that's what they're telling us, they don't have anyone in mind at the moment. And they could have, stuck it out with Bylsma. But that the move came from ownership. We did hear that from Lywicki. People weren't saying we needed to part ways with our coach. It came from the ownership. Ron Francis saying, I didn't like how we were playing. We needed more structure. Nobody at the top of the list with regard to coaches. So, what are your thoughts? This is my summary. Did you watch? It's a live stream, so it'll still be on YouTube. Once I get the video archive, I will definitely post it on the Locked On Kraken channel. But what were your biggest takeaways from that press conference? I still think there's a lot of work to do. That's my main takeaway. Coming up, though, let's talk about some possible replacements for Dan Bylsma. And then quickly, I'll get you ready for Mavericks hockey. We also have Coachella Valley hockey, but I will be at the Kansas City Mavericks game. So we're going to focus on the Mavericks, not on Monday, but on a Tuesday. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala. I went long in the first segment because I really wanted to break down this press conference for you. I still have a lot of questions. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Let me know in the chat. What was your biggest takeaway? Did anyone ease your mind? What questions do you still have? Let me know. But of course, we want to talk about possible replacements. And I got to admit, there are 2 names that are being mentioned that I might have my jaw agape. I am shocked and surprised that people would even mention these 2. Again, I'm talking about, and I was just on the squad show, spoiler alert, you'll see me this week on the squad show talking a little bit about this. But for a team where our new now general manager, Jason Botterill, says the younger players are a year older, we're going to get aggressive again in free agency. We want to, what else does he say here? It's about allowing young players to developing young talent is what he said. Young players stepping in. These are all part of my notes. So when you hear youth development, young players getting a role in the NHL, the one coach that I think is the antithesis of that, do you know who I'm going to say? Come on. Someone say it out loud. I know you said it. John Tortorella. John Tortorella, of course, is not with Philadelphia. A very weird departure, but everything about Torts to me is a little weird. He's definitely of a certain era, and I think it's passing him by, at least, being a bench boss. Not only do I think his whole demeanor and approach would be terrible for the Seattle Kraken, but let's not forget he is a guy that just does not vibe well with media. This is a young franchise, a franchise that we were told multiple times is winning. And I mean, not on the ice, but when Todd Leiweke I don't remember if he was asked to define winning or if he just defined it this way, but winning, the first thing he mentioned were facilities. The second thing he mentioned were the fans. And the third thing that he mentioned was ownership. I don't think any of those are the same as how John Tortorella would define winning. His hard nose, very passive aggressive, old school approach, I do not think is going to fit the Seattle Kraken. The other name that I think I can't even imagine bringing him to the Seattle Kraken is Peter Laviolette. Now, why? That's because Laviolette was the head coach of the Rangers until he was let go on Saturday. And now he's got, his team's 14 playoff appearances, won a Stanley Cup, an 846, 562, and 161 record, plus 25 ties. And so, the guy definitely knows about coaching, but he's coming from a dysfunctional Rangers organization where Capo Caco, who's now with us, the Seattle Kraken, he was a healthy scratch. And Caco has said multiple times, we've talked about this, that he's trusted more with the Seattle Kraken organization. He got a chance, right? HC opportunity. We talk about that all the time. And he talks about how confidence is a pretty big thing. So maybe it wasn't Lavalette. And why take the chance? Why take the chance when you have a young talent like Capo Caco, we got in a trade, who we can make it work with Capo Caco. So those are two I'm saying absolutely no to. A name that I kind of think could be interesting is actually Todd Nelson, especially as someone who's covered the Coachella Valley Firebirds for the last 2 years. Todd Nelson has a long track record of AHL success, including back-to-back titles for the Hershey Bears. Yeah, that's right. The Hershey Bears. We know a little bit about losing to them, don't we? His resume is also dotted with NHL assistant coaching jobs. So Todd Nelson seems to be able to work with young talent relatively well. The Hershey Bears have been a solid team, and we did hear from Jason Botterill a little bit of a mixed bag when it comes to Jessica Campbell. Jason seemed to confirm what we had heard reported, that she will be retained, and that the reason that Jessica Campbell will be retained is because of how she was able to work with young talent. I do not see Campbell working with Torts very well. And that's the thing. It sounded like Botterill kind of left the door open for a new head coach to bring in a coaching staff, while also saying that Jessica Campbell would be retained. Now, we saw that happen in the prior coaching change. I just think you got to be, mindful. Not everyone in the NHL space, quite frankly, wants to see women do what women like Jessica Campbell, like Allison Lucan, like Corey Chevery, I could go on and on and on, like Blake Bolden, but that they're doing. Not everyone wants that. I mean, I kind of think I alluded to one name just from his reputation alone, but I don't know. So if you keep Jessica Campbell, is she still going to work the power play? Again, power play wasn't great, has to improve. Not something explicitly mentioned, though, on today's call, which I found interesting. Carl Taylor, longtime coach of the Milwaukee Admirals, doesn't have NHL coaching experience, but another name, maybe you bring up someone from the AHL. Don Granato is being discussed. Bruce Boudreau, not active, but also kind of up there. Rick Tocchet mentioned, although he's not necessarily free, so to speak. Vancouver's got some things to figure out there. So, those are some of the names that we're hearing. I just got to say no to Pete and to Torts. I just don't see that vibing. I like the idea of someone who, again, if our immediate step, according to our new GM, is to work with young talent, then I think you need someone who has that patience. That is, unless you are going to keep Jessica Campbell, then what do we need? Let me know. I've got so many questions for you, because this is just like I'm still trying to make heads or tails of what's going on here. But if you keep Jessica Campbell, then maybe you don't need someone that has all of that AHL success and experience. We literally just had that, and then you get rid of it. So maybe they want someone who's more primed to coach at the NHL, to have better defensive structure, is what we heard from Ron Francis, that can fix an 0-12, and that's just this season, right? It goes to 0-14 or something like that if we look back. This team can't win back-to-backs, and Ron Francis, as he mentioned, the schedule is going to be condensed again. This is not a problem. That's a one-off. This is probably going to be an issue, and if the Kraken can't win back-to-backs, then they make themselves an easy target. Ron says, even if we go 50%, which is about the average there, that puts us, 12 points. That puts us in a different it's a different conversation that we're having regarding the playoffs. So that seemed like a big impetus. But if it wasn't conditioning and it wasn't goaltending, then what was the issue? I was trying to figure that out. The players seemed like they were trying to figure that out. This team lacked focus, they lacked motivation. I heard structure a lot. I really do think that maybe now the resistance or what seemed like the lethargic play of this team was it because of tensions, because of coaching. I don't know. I want to know more. I really want to know more. And I, I still feel a little. I feel for Bylsma in this situation. I think he got dealt a raw deal, but we kind of knew that coming in. Anyway, coming up on today's episode, let me quickly get you ready for what will be Kansas City and Coachella Valley playoff hockey happening tonight. Let's talk about it coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. We know the NBA playoffs are almost here, and we've already got one team up 2-0 in the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. So FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on this playoff action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And of course, you can look at the NHL odds there. You can look at the NBA odds, WNBA coming, futures bets, all that stuff. So don't miss out. Head to fanduel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Thanks, Kraken fans, for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, and I'm excited. I get to see the Kansas City Mavericks play today in Tulsa. They're taking on the Tulsa Oilers. Now, this series is tied 1-1. I was going to talk about this yesterday, but then, stuff went down. But, this is a Kansas City team that I told you before, they were able to take care of Tulsa last year. This is a different Tulsa team, though. And, as the Mavericks look to make a deep run once again in the Kelly Cup playoffs, they're going to have to get through a pretty scrappy Tulsa team. When we look at, how these teams match up, in game one, Tulsa actually got game one, and then Kansas City took game two. So the series is tied right now as we see game three happening tonight. So in game one, Tulsa takes game one 4-2, and Kansas City had to gut out an OT 3-2 win in game two. So the series is now tied at series is tied one game apiece. When we look at the head-to-head, going into tonight's game, Kansas City is 26-8-2 overall on the road. Haven't played any road games yet in the playoffs. The Tulsa Oilers are 18-13-5 at home. And, they have a better road record. Both teams have a better road record. When we look at scenarios, I like to do this. When scoring first, both teams doing pretty well, only single-digit losses. But things get interesting when we look at who's tied after the first. Tied after the first, Kansas City 16-6-2. Tied after the first, 15-6-4 for the Oilers. When you look at leading after the first and second, both teams are really good, but the advantage goes to Kansas City, 31-1-0, 36-1-2 when leading after the first and the second, respectively. But when you look at trailing after the first period, 2-11-3. trailing after the second period, 3-14-3 for your Kansas City Mavericks. So getting out ahead is super important for this team. So for Kansas City, we're definitely keeping an eye on the power play. We haven't had to see them really, we haven't been able to see them work that. The power play, 0%. The Kansas City Mavericks are 0 for 26 on the power play. So power play woes continue to plague the Kraken through and through. 14.3% for Tulsa. They are 3 out of 21. The PK is a perfect 26 for 26 for Tulsa because the Kansas City Mavericks are 0 of 26 in this series in 2 games. 0 for 26. Or I'm sorry, that's the head-to-head for the season. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So the Kansas City Mavericks 0 of 26 overall, and they had 3 opportunities on the power play in game 1. That was where they lost 4-2. The Kansas City Mavericks also had 2 more opportunities in the overtime win. So they're 0 for 5 now, 0 for 26 overall in the series. So that is definitely an area where Tulsa has Kansas City's number, is on the power play. Definitely cannot wait to hear what Tad has to say about that. Even though the Mavericks come in as the Mountain Division champions, regular season champs, this is the second consecutive season. This is a pretty well-balanced team, the number 1 versus the number 4. And so, this Anaheim affiliate is going to really make Kansas City work, but it's that power play that's got to shore up. So hopefully the boys can do something on the power play tonight. I will be at the game. And before I wrap, just want to let you know, of course, your I already talked about them. Your Coachella Valley Firebirds also in action tonight. I mentioned in our game time read, they're going to be taking on the Calgary Wranglers, and that's going to be at 9 p.m. Pacific time at Acrisure Arena. Didn't have a great end to the season for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, dropped 2 games there. But I think this is going to be a good series. The Calgary Wranglers are coming in as the 5th seed. The Coachella Valley Firebirds are the 4th seed. So this is going to be a best of 3 series starting tonight, Tuesday, April 22nd. Next game is on Saturday, April 26th, and then Sunday, if necessary, on April 27th. So much different structure than we see in the ECHL playoffs. So this is going to be a really good test for your Coachella Valley Firebirds. We'll talk a little bit more about them tomorrow. And then, of course, on Friday, as we get ready for game 2. That's our show. Wanted to give you my thoughts after we heard from the higher ups for the Seattle Kraken. And as I predicted, I have more questions than answers, but I can't wait to hear what you thought of today's press conference. Again, it should be available on the Seattle Kraken YouTube channel. And as soon as I finish recording, that video should be available. And I will also post it on the Locked On Kraken YouTube page. But a reminder to be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and always hold fast, stay true. I saw Striatic had a comment. We'll get to some comments later because we had a lot of comments about the firing. But let's hold fast. Let's stay true. We always say loud and proud, let's go Kraken. But tonight, it's a game night for our Firebirds and our Mavericks. So let's say, let's go Firebirds, let's go Mavericks as well. And I, Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.